Good afternoon. Yes, I also want to thank the Sheikh Salama bint Hamdan Foundation for making this meeting possible, because I think that many people are very curious to find out a bit more about this Qasr al-Hosn, which now has been for such a long time behind building hoardings. And now you have learned a lot about how it was built and why and its function. I will tell you a little bit about what it was like to actually be inside, and about some of the people also that have worked in the Qasr al-Hosn. I myself had the privilege of becoming the first European, not only woman, but the first European to actually go in and out every day. There were other people who have been visiting earlier when Sheikh Shahbout was still using it as his place of government, and people who had to deal with him came to visit, but it was always a matter of hours. Whereas I had this privilege of being part of what was going on in the old fort. When I first went there, it was not much different in 1969 from this picture that you see now. All around, no roads yet, but they were very fast in coming, because in 69 already the corniche had been started to be built and Hamdan Street was coming along. When I first came into the fort in 69, the reason was that I am a German historian and social history is my field, and I came to be with my husband David, whose mission was to find oil. He always says they found too much of it, but anyway, I was here while this momentous announcement was made from the British government that they would actually want to withdraw their military and diplomatic and political protection of all the trucial states in 1971. This announcement was made in 1968. Suddenly, a lot of journalists and so on descended on Abu Dhabi in particular to see how this would now work out politically. And my particular interest was to ask myself, with this political development and change, what is going to happen? And with the fantastic amount of wealth that was going to come, one could see that with the oil, how is the society of this town and eventually of the emirate and of the whole region going to take this change that is bound to come? But first of all, changing from what? I wanted to know what the society was like. Coming from Berlin, it was all very strange. So first start to learn some Arabic and then ask myself and try to find out, what does it mean? I'm here now living in a tribal society, it's a Muslim society, it has its economy has more or less collapsed, the pearling, and I could ask some people, but it was easier to look if there's anything written. And alas, I found that in the old fort there was a small place which was called the Center for Documentation and Research. It had been set up by the Egyptian historian Dr. Mohammed Morsi Abdallah, and he had been tasked by Sheikh Zayed and in proxy by the Rais Diwan Ahmed Khalifa Suedi to set up a center into which one could collect evidence of, first of all, what were the all the treaties that the British were now abrogating, and what was the history all around it. And one needed to bring written evidence, and one of the places to find this was British archives, British Indian archives, which had been moved to London. And a lot of material around it would be books and articles and so on. And so a lot of collection had already been done from 68 to 69. And Dr. Morsi was assisted by a national Mansour, and an Omani called Ali bin Nasser al-Hajjari. And then along came this German historian who was looking for material. And of course, very soon, it also became obvious that what had been accumulated in a short time was a little bit needed sorting out. And I had had some experience in helping as a student in a library in the university in Berlin. So here I was tasked with sorting out this library and the archive material. And when that was done, I got into what the material was there anyway, and then started myself to write and to publish and so on. My point today is not to talk about that, but actually about the building where I found myself. And these two villas, and the further one of these villas was the place where it all began, where the center was founded in 1968, in one room downstairs, L-shaped, and we all fitted in. On top, the top floor was, it took me some time to find out what was happening there, but it was the telex room, the telex for all the government. One important person who also was there was actually the Mayordomo, who had worked for Sheikh Shahboud already. He had sorted out everything, and so he was still there for Sheikh Zayed. And this was Zayed Abdullah al-Kabir, and he was at the foot of the old tower, the oldest tower, which we have heard from 1761, and at the foot of this is a building, and that was his office. That tower on my right here, that tower was attached to Sheikh Shahboud's quarters, so to speak, and in the corner, just under the corner, was his private majlis, which was a very small but lovely square majlis with a round pillar in the middle, very decorative, and it had windows on all four sides. I can't go into the detail how this was geographically achieved, but it was a feat of no mean architecture. He also had a steps really, wooden steps to the roof. This building here, nevertheless, this one-story building became Sheikh Shahboud's sort of daily majlis when he received people from the outside for work, oil people and contractors and so on. And there were two rooms, and he received them, I don't know, in the first or the second, but between these two rooms was not a door, just an opening. And through this opening, you would have been able to look into the courtyard, except that in such situations you actually have a wall, you are confronted by a wall, and you have to go right or left of the wall to get into the courtyard. So privacy was maintained. When I came to the fort in 1969, and for quite a few years after, in this building, these two rooms were occupied by the guards who had probably been already there for Sheikh Shahboud and certainly still lived there. And also in this area, there were one or two of Sheikh Zayed's falconers. They lived there. But that was the only people who lived here. The people who worked here and went in and out on a daily basis were there are also in this L here, there were more rooms and for people to work. The kitchen, important. Kitchen was along here. This was the kitchen. And again, it has a sort of, it blocks the sight from the kitchen into the main courtyard. But this is the kitchen here. And in this picture, it doesn't even have a roof. Later, when it must have been put on fairly soon after this photo was taken, because but it was open, completely open into the outside, and why? It was because in that kitchen you had deep pits which were filled with wood, and then you had huge cauldrons in which things were roasted and cooked and so on. And they were big enough to, when one time when I took Nicholas, who is sitting here somewhere, when he was 6, and his little friend into the fort, and we visited back here, and they could actually each sort of huddle in one of the big pots. So that's how big they were. This building here, the one next to this tower, was actually built by Shahbud. It looks as though it's part of the old fort, but it wasn't. It was also restructured by Sheikh Shahbud, and it became his, well, upstairs like a dining room. And there are photographs when, for instance, the oil company, the first oil exportation, and lots of ladies with hats and so on came from London, and they're all sitting at a long, not table, but the meal was on the ground, and all these people sitting around. In this photograph that I show you now is actually on the right is the founder of the center, Dr. Mohammed Morsi Abdallah, and then of course Sheikh Zayed, Ahmed Khalifa Suwaidi. In the middle is someone, he is Fawaz Qudsi, who came to work in the center in the early 70s. And then it's myself and our son Nicholas. And I tell you why, what this occasion was. It's actually described today in the National, but the occasion briefly was that Sheikh Zayed had been asked, or he decided he wanted to see the building site. And so the people from the Public Works Department and the consultants brought the moquette, brought the model along, and it was just plonked outside the fort on the concrete, and a few chairs were put there. And Dr. Morsi in the morning had asked us, please, can you be there to receive Sheikh Zayed? And so we all went along, because for Nicholas it was actually a day when there was a school bazaar, and he and his sister were quite upset that we had other plans for the afternoon. But they then, in the end, enjoyed it enormously, particularly because Sheikh Zayed was then carrying little girl Miriam, and we toured the building site, and it was very exciting for the children. So they had their afternoon when we arrived at the bazaar in the school. This is a picture of years later, when this particular restructuring, almost one can say, had happened to the outside part, which is actually the older part. And this here is a view of the corridor, the downstairs corridor, of what really turned to be the new part, the part that Shahbud had built, which is really a palace rather than a fort. It has these beautiful arcades, which you have seen in another picture. And inside it was very sensitively restored and made to use to fit very well for the use that the center had. Expanded with books and material and archives and so on. Here is a view through one of the upstairs windows into the courtyard, which was really very nicely set up with gardens. Also, I must say that probably the gardens didn't fit as well as what it is now, where all the gardens are away and it's just sand and the palm trees, which is more the way it used to look in the past. Here, a view of one of the rooms. I always try to explain why the rooms, actually, the windows are shouldered to floor, and why not, normal windows. Now, the reason is that when you, first of all, you sit on the floor, so that's where you want to have the draft. And secondly, the sun, when the sun falls onto the window, the higher the window, the longer you have the sun when it gets very, very hot. But if you have the window far down, then you have it only in morning and evening. And in this picture, in fact, the windows on the top are a later edition, or they were put by, long story, by some not so sensitive consultants, but anyway, originally above the windows you would have had recesses, just wide recesses, also with no shutters or anything, for people to put all the things that little children shouldn't play with, or like glass and so on. So that was places to put things. And here, oops, that's a view of one of the rooms where on the one side all of these would actually have been niches. Up it would all have been wide niches. Further down, on the one side, on the left, would have been windows, where the shutters could be opened to the outside, and there are metal grills so that nothing falls out. On the inside as well, there would have been windows to the corridor, again with shutters, so that you can keep the warmth in the winter, and grills so that you sort of separate between the corridor and the inside. But the idea is that you have the air coming all the way across from the window through the room to the corridor, and the corridor was open to the outside as well. So this is a picture of one of the downstairs rooms, which in the area where Sheikh Shahboud and Sheikha Miriam lived. And this was, they were plaster cast painted to make the room more pleasant and more friendly, because that is a downstairs which was used in the winter, and that in all the downstairs rooms, none of them had windows to the outside, so it was nice to make them a bit more friendly. It only had windows to the corridor, to the inside. And people have asked me, what do these things mean? Well, there is one shouldn't always find, try to find some meaning behind a particular decoration. It was just fun, it was nice, it was colorful, and the ones we see here actually are refurbished. They've been taken down, recast, and painted again. But hopefully they will eventually be seen by people who come to visit. This is just one example of the archive material, and we have seen better. This is the far end, that is Mr. Ahmed Khalifa Suwaidi and myself, and the late Hamouda bin Ali, and then Mohammed Habrouche. And the lady in black is the lady who actually translated a book that I've written about the UAE into Arabic. That just somehow sums up that the center has always had the blessing and really the say-so of the authorities in Abu Dhabi. And while Sheikh Zayed was intimately involved in its setting up, Sheikh Khalifa and his brothers are now very much involved in the next phase. And you have heard a little about the earlier phases, but the next phase is actually a change in name. When I was there for altogether 39 years, it was always the Center for Documentation and Research. Now it is the National Center for Documentation and Research, so it is quite a bigger stage. And one of the reasons is because the mission has changed. It is collecting not the archives from other nations, that was the mission we started with, from any Portuguese, French, whoever had a business or no good business to come to the Gulf and left archive material. That was the original mission. Now the mission is to collect the material which departments and ministries in Abu Dhabi generate and which has to be collected. And that is another mission.